I've tried to tackle this one before, but I just couldn't manage to do it in a way that satisfied me. Every time I tried to tackle this film in particular, I ended up reaching over 30 minutes. I do not want to do that again this time. Let's try to do small concepts, which is why we're going to do a comparatorial type of video here. We may even make it a series. We'll call it the Straw Dog series. Or I'll just do one of them and completely forget to do the rest, which is more likely to happen unless somebody reminds me. So, what you're looking before you is a copy that was banned in the UK. Well, not this copy in particular, but this came out when it was banned, because Straw Dogs, made in 1971, was banned in the UK during the video nasty era, and it was unbanned back in 2002, which means this case was made pre-2002. Now, this one is the remake. This one came out in 2011, 2007, somewhere around there. I think 2007. This case might have been made in 2011. If we look at the back, we might be able to answer that. Yes, this case was made in 2011. I believe the movie itself, though, may have come out in 2007. Don't quote me on that. I'm going to use the 2011 marker, because that's just what this case says. Because that's a perfect thing. 30-year difference. 30 years apart between the two films. That's fantastic. In this one, we have the same cast, essentially, in both of these, but this one does add some characters, and I may get into that later, and I may not. The thing I want to start out with is, in the original, we have a dynamic of Dustin Hoffman's character, who plays a character named David, whom is somebody I've personally analyzed to be somebody who is emotionally and sexually repressed. But this is a character who is trying to exemplify the masculine trait. At least he's trying to, in his own way. He moves into the countryside in England, where things are done a little bit differently from the way he knows. He's a city boy, he's an educated fellow. He isn't exactly a country person. He moves out to the country for the sake of his astronomy thing. He's a mathematician that studies stellar communication or something like that. It doesn't really matter what he does. It's just he's out here because of what he does. He moves out here, which happens to be the small town where his wife grew up. They are moving into his wife's father's home, from what I gather. I think that's what this film actually blatantly tells you. In this one, I don't know if it's blatantly said. It could have been. I'm not going to spend too much time on that. But they move into this house, and they have a cat. They have a pet cat. And that's the main focus of this particular part of the Straw Dogs comparison, is the cat. The cat, you would think, isn't exactly important to the story, but it is massively different in comparison to these two films. In this one, we see a scene with Dustin Hoffman not necessarily being too kind to the cat. He's kicking the cat. He's throwing things at the cat, throwing fruit at the cat, while he's just playing banter with his wife and who's in the other room. His wife actually really likes the cat. He doesn't really care about the cat. And he's throwing things at it. He's really mistreating the cat. That scene is not in the remake, because in this one, the remake wants to tell a slightly different story in regards to this cat. And I would argue that the story that the remake tried to tell in regards to the cat isn't exactly as psychologically compelling, at least in regards to the David character. The dynamic that David has with Amy's ex-boyfriend in the remake, who is played by Alexander Skarsgård, and the wife Amy is played by Kate Bosworth here, and David is played by James Marsden. And I would argue that they are very consistent with the roles. Alexander Skarsgård may be an improvement over the boyfriend character that Kate had, the ex-boyfriend character from Small Town. I would argue he's the only improvement in the remake. So, in this one, they wanted to make it a stronger rivalry, so to speak, between these two characters. So they made it less ambiguous over what happened to the cat. What happened to the cat? Well, in both versions, the David character, roughly very early into the second act, opens the closet and finds the cat has been strangled hanging on one of the coat hangers in the closet. David finds the cat, he closes the closet, and silently walks to the bed and sits down. In both versions, this is kept the same. This is exactly the same. The wife then goes into the closet and sees the cat, and she is very distraught. In the subsequent scene, Amy confronts David and asks him who he thinks killed their cat. She asks, who, in regards to some context there, I'm getting ahead of myself because I'm trying not to talk about the entire film, because if I did, I would be here for 2-3 hours. I'm not doing that again. But I'll tell you the context in regards to why she suspects these specific people. At the start of the film, when they move into this homestead out in the countryside, their garage, barn, shed, or whatever, the roof has been collapsed in. So David hires some local construction crew who is headed by the ex-boyfriend of Amy, played by Alexander Skarsgård in this version, played by somebody whose name I can't remember in this version. In both versions, there's 4 construction workers. They come to work on the roof. They usually laze about. They don't respect the David character. And David doesn't necessarily put his foot down as hard as he should, as hard as Amy believes that he should. These guys tend to walk all over the David character, and David's repressed emotions start to bubble under the surface, but he keeps his composure. But you sense that he is a very unnerved man who is just on the edge. And this version does this perfectly. You can really feel the psychological grip that, and you can feel that it's kind of slipping as the film further progresses into the plot for the David character. In this one, it's not as prevalent. They make it very obvious on a lot of things. Like, they pretty much explain what Straw Dogs means in this version. Just James Marsden's character just explains what Straw Dogs means. I'm not going to tell you what Straw Dogs means, because they didn't tell you what it means in this version. It's a lot of the stuff is left unspoken because the ambiguity of it was what made it powerful to me. So, Amy suspects 1 or 2 of the construction workers that David has hired to work on their roof is responsible for the death of the cat. She suspects that it might be her ex-boyfriend or one of the other vagabonds. And we later learn that the 2 that she suspects end up doing something that I will not be talking about in this episode. Let's just tell you, though, that it was one of the sources of the major controversies behind this version, and it was heavily censored and changed drastically in this version. We're going to leave it at that. So with the suspicion of 1 or 2 of the construction workers, she asks David who he thinks broke into their house and killed their cat out of spite. David doesn't want to name any names. In both versions, this is the same. David doesn't want to jump to any conclusions, but in this one, you get the feeling that he's trying to be a nice guy. He doesn't want to be accusatory to these people he has hired to work on his garage, and he doesn't necessarily want to be a douche. And Amy doesn't care about that. She knows these people, and she suspects 1 or 2 of them has done this, right? In this version, it's far more ambiguous, especially with Dustin Hoffman's acting. You could tell by the look in Dustin's eyes, the look in the whole David dynamic in this scene. that you might actually start to question, did David kill the cat? He never liked the cat to begin with. Maybe he just did it out of a fit of repressed anger. Maybe he even completely forgot that he did it, or maybe he completely knows that he did it, but he just doesn't want to admit that he did it. He doesn't care that he did it. He just doesn't want to tell her that he did it. And she's not going to accuse him that he did it, because he'll get mad at her if she did that. But you get that's the beauty of that scene in the original version here, is that the ambiguity behind the death of the cat could go either way. It could have been the boyfriend character, the ex-boyfriend character. He may have killed the cat because he feels that Amy is coveting him over coveting David, the husband character. So the ex-boyfriend starts to encroach upon David's territory and starts to kill the cat as a means of saying, hey, I could just come in here and mess with your crap and you will do nothing to me. Now, you could say that that is the dynamic that they're going for, and that is definitely a dynamic that they were trying to push towards in this version. But in this one, it's very ambiguous. David could have just as easily have killed that cat because he didn't like the cat. Like, you get the feeling he doesn't like the cat in this version, but he doesn't. You don't feel like the David that James Marsden portrays is that type of guy who would kill the cat. You don't feel that from him. You can feel that from Dustin Hoffman's portrayal here. You can feel that ambiguity, that question that's nagging at the back of your head throughout the rest of the runtime. Did David kill that cat? Or did the ex-boyfriend kill the cat? Now, we see in a subsequent scene of the second act, which I will not name, in this version, during that confrontation in the second act, that very controversial scene that was heavily censored in this version, Amy confronts the ex-boyfriend about the cat. She openly, bluntly asks him, did he mess with the cat? And he says that he didn't mess with the cat. But then, partway through the scene, you get the feeling that maybe they did. Maybe they killed the cat. Maybe they killed the cat because, you know, they're pretty psychotic people. But in this version, David feels just as psychotic as the construction workers working on the house, but in a very different but equally dangerous way. David could have killed that cat, and I would not have been surprised in the slightest if this version went with that dynamic instead. But I would understand why they changed it in this version to make David seem more like a sympathetic hero-type character who's just trying to protect his house. Because it's 30 years later, it's a different dynamic. In this one, it feels like there are no heroes in this film. It feels like there are no hero-type characters. A protagonist can exist without being good. Let's say you write a story from the point of view of an anti-hero / villain who has an opposing force that could be somebody who is very just and good. An antagonist is only an opposing force to a protagonist who is the main point of view that your story is focused on. It doesn't have to be a good guy. This David character is definitely not a good guy. We could definitely see that near the third act, where he literally threatens to kill Amy if she starts to jeopardize his own life and starts doing some stuff that he disagrees with heavily. He basically tells her, as he grabs her neck in the third act, if you open that door, I'll break your neck. That's what he says in the movie, in this version. It doesn't exist in this one. It doesn't exist in that one. The David character is very mellowed out in this version. He's not as psychologically on edge. So I would argue, if the differentiation clause, which version did it better, which version had a better killed the cat scene, I would argue that the original was far more compelling, far more thought-provoking. Even if it is substantially darker, I would still suggest this one was the better one of the two in who killed the cat.